morning and welcome everybody to Fabulous Fridays, sponsored by Montana State University, the Montana 4-H Foundation, and the Montana Center for Youth Development. So today's Fabulous Fridays topics are how to save money for your heirs by avoiding probate. So you can, we want to remind everybody that each of these sessions are being recorded and you can view the recordings, the schedule and the resources for each webinar as well as the logins. And so you can either use this QR code, and if you don't know how to do that, you can just hold your phone up and put it on picture mode and it should take you right there. Or you can go to the website for all of the resources. So my name is Mandie Reed and I am the Wheatland County Extension Agent located in Harlowton, Montana. And I am so excited to be here today with our guest and to also have been invited by Dr. Marsha Goetting, our MSU professor and Extension of Family Economics Specialist, to join you today for this webinar. We couldn't do this without Carrie. Carrie is the MSU Extension Publications Assistant, and she helps us line out all of the links and the website and the resources, make sure they're available for you. And if you have any issues and you put them in the chat, Carrie's the one who's going to help you get your technology sorted out today. I'd like to take a second and welcome the 251 Montanans that have logged on to join us today. Thank you so much for taking your time and joining us, as well as we have 16 people from out of state who have logged on to join us. And the only thing I'd like to say is just to make sure that anything that we cover today is the same in our state as it is in your state. So Mandie and Marsha's participant engagement tools. So we all know that WebEx meetings are not quite as interactive as face-to-face. But we've come up with some ways to hopefully keep you engaged through our presentation today. So the first tool, Marsha's mentioned it, we have two guests joining us today, Jane Wolery, the Executive Director for the Montana 4-H Foundation, and then Sarah Hamlen, who is a Montana 4-H alumni, is also joining us today, and that'll be towards the end. Our second audience engagement tool is our poll questions. So this is a chance for you to let us know what you're thinking or answer some questions and to be engaged. So let's practice one right now. So we have this poll question for you guys, and Carrie's going to put that up. And we're just asking, if you watched last week, what are some of the things that you did? So if you would go ahead and answer that, we'll just take just a minute and give you a chance to figure out where those polls are, how they're showing up on your computer or your phone, and you can practice answering them. So hopefully everybody can see that. We did get some feedback last time that we didn't leave the polls up long enough, so we'll try to do a better job about that this week for everybody.
And just to remind you too, that this is one of those questions that you get to have more than one if indeed you do that, but also don't forget to hit the submit button. I think we had several people last week that were clicking, but they didn't hit the submit button, and that's kind of down at the bottom on the right. So take a look at that and let us know if you did anything last time. And then the other category is number F. It says another action, and you can just share with us in the chat room. Thank you much.
Awesome. Oh, thank you.
I see somebody's rewriting their will. Yay!
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you for those reminders, Marsha. All right. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to answer that. And we'll probably move on, and we won't necessarily review those results here, but in the rest of the session, we'll go through the results also. All right, so our next engagement tool is an opportunity to use the chat panel. And so we've already pointed that out, and it was in the slides before we started this morning as well. But if you have a question, you can just put it in the chat panel, or something you'd like us to know, or a comment. You have the chance to put that in the chat panel. You can just drop it right on there. And then after the webinar is over today, we're going to stay on for 15 minutes extra to answer your questions. If we don't have a chance to get to all of the questions, then we'll take those out of the chat and get you an email with the answers to those questions. So please feel free to put those in the chat. This is a particularly exciting engagement tool. We have a door prize. You have to be present to win. And so we will be drawing for this absolutely beautiful travel mug with the Montana State University and Clover on it. So definitely make sure that you stick around to be eligible to win this door prize. And so Marsha is a wildflower enthusiast as well as an extremely talented photographer. So how are you going to work your wildflowers into our program today, Marsha?
Well, I tell you, I couldn't resist using wildflowers, and I did this last week. And the idea is that you can use these wildflower names as reminders for some of the concepts. And people tell me they just enjoy looking at the flowers. And then as I talk about something, it does help with the reminders. And this is an easy one because it's a steer's head. And maybe you haven't seen one of those, but it's a very tiny little flower that appears in May in Yellowstone National Park. So that tells me what I want to do is steer you to an awareness how you could avoid the cost of probate with a pod. And now you're going to find out what a pod is. And then we also, a TOD. You can use a TOD to avoid the probate costs of your stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. So we'll tell you what a TOD is. And then we also have a TOD with a double D, and that is in real estate. Our legislature has been kind and allows us to leave property without going through probate. Amazing. And then the last session, they passed a new law that allows us to put a beneficiary designation on our vessels and vehicles. So here's a death canvas. Now, the death canvas is very easy to remind you about payable on death designations. That's what a pod is. And a pod is something that you find at your banks, in your credit unions, any of your other financial institutions. So it's something that you ask for there. It's not like there's a POD form that is available from the state or available from Extension. They're right there at the financial institution. And all of us have different kinds of accounts. You know, it could be a checking account, savings account, certificates of deposit, and United States savings bonds. So you can use all of those for a POD. Now, at death, the easy thing is that all your beneficiary will need to do is say, hi, I am so-and-so, and here's my photo ID, here's the affidavit of death, and the financial institution then will write out a check to your beneficiary. And it doesn't have to go through any kind of court process to get from you to the person that you named as that beneficiary. And the neat thing too about pods is that they allow you to just very easily recognize one of your favorite nonprofits. And of course, our group, our favorite is the Montana 4-H Foundation. So just a reminder, a tip on Fabulous Fridays here, you can use pods to not only control the distribution to your beneficiaries, but at the same time, you get to avoid probate. And that's something I'm asked all the time. Marsha, what are some ways to avoid probate? So Mandie, how about telling us about the estate planning goals of the Hart family?
Yeah, so we're looking at the Hart-leafed arnica here. And Joe Hart and Brooke Hart have been having some heart-to-heart discussions about their legacy planning. And Joe has decided that he has a CD for $100,000, and he has designated Brooke, his sweetheart, as his POD beneficiary. So that will be payable on death to his wife. So Joe later changes his mind and writes a will and decides that he would like to leave that CD to his son, Eric Hart. So we have a poll question. Excuse me, I got all nervous and tongue-tied. So who would receive the $100,000 CD, Brooke or Eric? So just take a second here and answer that.
And Mandie, I'm using a very fancy word there. I'm saying that Eric was the devotee. Well, would you believe that is the term that's used in a will when you're saying this is who your beneficiary is going to be? Now, I think it'd make more sense to call it beneficiary because all of us know what that is, but it's a devotee. And not only that, the thing that you're leaving is a devise. See, this way you'll know what the attorney's talking about when you go in. And don't forget to hit that submit button.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marsha. All right. So how's our poll looking, Carrie?
58% said Brooke and only 9% said Eric.
Excellent. All right. So those of you that said Brooke are correct. Brooke would, in fact, inherit the CD because she is the beneficiary. And so a payable on a POD, payable on death beneficiary, is a form of a contract, and a provision in a will cannot undo a contract. So if Joe really did change his mind, what should he do? He should go to his bank or credit union and fill out a new POD beneficiary designation, and that reflects his wishes, naming Eric as the beneficiary. So let's go through this together, and you can sing if you'd like, maybe in your car, and you'll sound better. I'm not going to sing for us, but we're going to say it together. You can't undo a POD with a will. Awesome. Excellent.
Mandie, I bet there's some people out there that are old enough to remember the dancing ball, Mitch Miller, and all that. Well, moving along, I'm giving away my age that way. So,
So I'd like to note our tip from our Heartleaf Arnica is to review your POD beneficiary designations on your checking accounts, your certificates of deposit, and your savings bonds to make sure that they are, in fact, what you want them to be. And just one note that you should know on U.S. savings bonds, you can only have one designation, one person designated.
but
Marsha,
on the others, I'm sorry, Mandie, for the others, you can have as many as the institution will allow you. And it's just something to remember that if the institution has like 4 or 5, that you're not putting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because it could be they think this is the first benefit, primary, secondary, third, tertiary, and fourthiary, so just look at the form. And if you want to make 5 as your beneficiaries, mark out those numbers so it's all equal. Now, if you want to, you could say, I want a POD 70% to this individual and 30% to another individual. And that's allowed on a POD. But you can't do that with United States Savings Bond, Mandie. I don't know why, but that's a rule they have.
Fair enough. So Marsha, could you please tell us how the Albino family used a TOD to save on probate costs?
Okay. Well, what we're going to be looking at here is the albino family, of course, and I just couldn't help but use one of these in my presentation because they're somewhat rare. If you see on the left, what we've got is the albino, of course, and we've got the regular one over there. And to be honest, when I first saw the white one, I didn't think I'd found something rare. I thought I'd found a sick plant. And when I looked at it, I could tell how healthy. Well, moving along. So what we have here is the albino family. And they're like many of us at a point in time where everybody's alive, parents have children, children get married, and then the children have grandchildren. But things started happening with this particular family. And what we're looking at here is a $100,000 certificate of deposit. And we're just going to take a look here with the husband and the wife. Okay, the husband died before she did. So we've got the wife now, who is the one that has her name on this certificate of deposit. So we take a look at that, and what we're going to do is look at the financial institution's form. And does that form say it's by right of representation? Does it say equally? Or does the form that your particular institution has say state law? So we take a look, and let's say that they say it's by right of representation. So the poll question for you is, what fraction, if any, does the child with the red lightning bolt receive? So this is the grandma dying. The people that don't have black on them are still alive. And we want to know what that fraction is going to be. So with right of representation, what fraction will the grandchild receive? Nothing, a sixth, an eighth, or a ninth. So Carrie will pull up the poll. You will have a chance to give us your response and hit that submit button. Now, this is what you call radio silence. And radio programs always say you cannot have a silent thing. So Mandie and I, oh, I've got a note here that I just saw up here on the screen that you have to hit submit more than once. I'm not aware, maybe that'll give you twice, but I doubt that WebEx would let you do that. But just don't forget to hit the submit. Okay, Carrie, I'm not saying stop it, but I'm just saying, are there enough people in that we could have you report to us on what the responses were?
Half the people have voted. So
Okay, so let's look at the responses.
24% said nothing, 7% said 1/6, 5% said 1/8, and 21% said 1/9.
Okay, so we had the 21% with the ninth, but we had, I think you said 24% with nothing. And excuse me, but you guys are being mean to not leave that poor kid anything. But those that said 1/9 are the ones that have it right. So in a way, this was kind of a refresher from the people that participated last week, and it's a different example, but the approach still is the same. Here we're talking about right of representation. We're talking about dividing that $100,000 certificate of deposit, and this child would receive 1/9 of that. Now, if the POD or a TOD happen to say, we are going to divide it equally to the living children, then what that mom has done is said everything goes to that one child that's alive. So therefore, the grandchildren of the deceased children, oh boy, doesn't that get complicated? But luckily it's there visually, that we can see the turquoise child doesn't receive anything. The green children don't receive anything either. And of course, the pink children might benefit if dad decides to leave that to them and doesn't spend it all, of course. Well, moving along, I think that Montanans really do need to know the difference between right of representation and equally when you're going to use those words in a will, or if they do appear on a POD or a TOD form. Now, Mandie, how about using this death canvas? Now, this is a meadow one. Before we talked about the mountain. And I want you to talk about transfer on death registrations.
All right. So yeah, we're going to use the Meadow Death Canvas to talk about the transfer on death registrations. I apologize this morning. Anyway, so we would use a TOD on our stocks, our bonds, or our mutual funds. So a TOD registration is going to transfer those directly to our beneficiary without probate. So it's going to allow those assets to move directly to them upon death without going through the probate process. So you can use TODs or PODs to also leave your assets or transfer your assets to your favorite charity or nonprofit. And a couple that we wanted to mention is the Montana Community Foundation. You might have a local community foundation, or of course our favorite, the Montana 4-H Foundation. So our tip from the Meadow Death Chemist is to use your TODs to control the distribution of your stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, and avoid probate fees after death to make sure that those transfer. So we
And Mandie?
Oh, yes.
Sorry. This is another example of a form that is available. Like if you have a stockbroker, the stockbroker would have the form, and then that particular form would be used for all the stocks and bonds that you have at that particular brokerage firm. Now, if you have a mutual fund, for example, it could be the mutual fund that you have has one of those forms online. So take a look. Again, it's not a form that you go to a bookstore or extension to receive, because those are available from the people that are offering the service.
Oh, that's a great tip. Thank you, Marsha. So we have another poll question for you. We're making you work pretty hard today. And our poll question, our third poll question is, now that you know about PODs and TODs, will you place them on your accounts? So this is pretty easy. We're just wondering what you're thinking. So if you could take a second and answer that.
Oh, I might share the other night I had a program, and nobody had utilized any of the pods and TODs. And so I was glad to be able to share that information with people that didn't know about it.
Oh, that is excellent. And also to make sure people know what they do if they do decide to use them.
Marsha, you did have a comment that a lady in Idaho said they don't have TODs in Idaho.
Well, visit with your legislator, because many of the states that have passed the Uniform Probate Code, that is just now a basic part of that, is to let people decide on their beneficiary designations and not have to go through that process. Now, I saw a question flash there about a POD and a TOD. And even at my meeting, I said, well, obviously one has to be better. Which one should I use? And I go, wait a minute. A POD is one that you use at the financial institutions. These are your banks and your credit unions. It's a pod, payable on debt. The TOD is a registration of all of your stocks. And so, for example, if you're going to leave 1/5, that 1/5 is going to go down to each of the individuals that you mentioned. So what we've got there is a difference in the forms, and it's the legislature determining one is for financial accounts, the other is for stocks and bonds. So can you give us the percentages on this one?
So 37% said yes, and only 1% said no. And there were more than half that responded to this.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so Marsha, I have a feeling that you're going to explore a way to avoid probate on our real property.
Yeah, I'm excited because we have an explorer's exemption, so of course I want to explore. And this is called a transfer on death deed. And this is a way that you can convey real property to designated beneficiaries, and they don't have to go through probate. So can you imagine, you've got $3 million worth of land out there, and you don't have to take that through probate, which is really kind of exciting. So let's talk about that a little bit more, because some of you out there may have already filed what is called a beneficiary deed. And you did that when we had beneficiary deeds. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to run right out and do now a transfer on death deed. This is just as of 2019, October 1, they're called transfer on death deeds. Okay. And keep in mind that the beneficiary does not own that property until you die. And what that means is they can't sell that property out from under you. They can't use your property as collateral for a loan. Your property cannot go to court and somebody grab it, for example. So they work the same. The beneficiary deed, the transfer on death deed, they are pretty much identical, which is why I wondered, why did they change the name? I don't know. So how do we do a transfer on death deed? You've got a really nice home out there and you have it in, let's say, Gallatin County. That's Bozeman. So you go to the clerk and recorder in the county where the real property is located. And if you're a land baron, and maybe you happen to have land also in Richland County, that means that land would need to be distributed according to the I want to say beneficiary deed, but the transfer on death deed that you filed there. So if you have land all over Montana, keep in mind you're going to have to file in each of those counties. Now, who is going to be your designated beneficiary? Anybody that you want. It could be your spouse, it can be your children, any other kinds of relatives that you have, even friends or a corporation, and of course, your favorite nonprofits. And like Mandie says, we have a lot of communities out there that have local nonprofits. And if you decide that's what you want to do with your property, you know, for shooting sports, for we've got animal shelters, there's all kinds of things in communities. Now, here's the caveat. Whoops. Here's the caveat with this. Title companies. Title companies have decided that they will not issue title insurance for at least a year after the person receives the property. And the reason is in a normal probate process, everything is handled and you know that the creditors have been paid off. So you have a probate and they have it called settling. And the title companies don't feel comfortable. And I'm hoping that issue will be resolved at some point in time. But the problem is, if you know your heirs are going to sell your house, then we might want to go back to the old-fashioned way, leave that to them in a will. Then the personal representative is going to submit that will for probate. And then, yeah, you got to go through the probate process. But there is a law now that says instead of figuring out probate based on percentages, it's going to be a reasonable fee. That's what the statute says is reasonable. So with a will, you may choose that is the best for your particular situation. If they're not going to sell the property, that doesn't become an issue. So I think what you want to do is continue to explore whether or not a transfer on death deed is really something that you want. And that's why I put together a MSU Extension mock guide about transfer on death deeds. So that's listed in the resource room, and be sure to download that and take a close look at it. So Mandie, how about you tell our participants how they could outfox the Todd law?
So we're going to use the foxglove to remind us of how we might want to outfox the law. So so what if our designated beneficiary dies before the owner of the property? And so then that property would be distributed according to the state law. But we're going to be foxy and specify a successor beneficiary. So we'll make sure that we have taken care of that. So we're going to use Mark Fox as our example today, and he files a transfer on death deed, and his beneficiary is his son, Evan. He can also have a successor beneficiary, Evan's son, Luke. And so what that means is that if Evan passes away before Mark, then the assets will automatically transfer to the grandson, Luke, as our alternate or successor beneficiary. You can also have two. So say Evan has two children and you'd like to include both of them. So you can leave 50% to Luke and 50% to Lily. So then if Evan passes away before Mark, then his successor beneficiaries are equally Luke and Lily. And the same thing, you can also have your favorite nonprofit as a successor beneficiary as well. So we want to outfox the law by naming our a nonprofit or a successor beneficiary on a successor beneficiary. Thank you.
Hey, Mandie, you know, it occurs to me just right now that I haven't included the successor beneficiary on your pods and Tods. You know, if you think about it, you and your husband ride around together, and if you've named one another, it would be a good idea to also have that successor on those because, hey, if something happens to you, you want it to go down to the other individual and still avoid that probate process.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Marsha. So what happens if a person has both a written will and a Todd?
Okay, I'm going to use a blue flax to explain this because it reminds me of my friend Gary Blue, who happens to have two blue children. And he's got Linda and Matt. And Gary has filed a transfer on death deed naming his daughter Linda as the designated beneficiary. Okay, later, and we don't know the reasons that Gary has changed his mind, but now he's going to leave that same property to his son, Matt. So, of course, we're going to ask you who receives the property when Gary Blue passes away. Is it going to be Linda because she's the designated beneficiary, or is it going to be Matt Blue because what we have here is a will that was written after the Todd was filed? So up to you to decide. I guess if we had experience, Mandie, in radio broadcasting, we would be having this conversation back and forth about the topic for the day. But I could, you know, I could really see this being a problem down the road if perhaps Gary starts to have some memory loss. You know, he may not even remember that he'd named Linda. And I can see that, you know, as people move towards the later stages of Alzheimer's, that we might have some real challenges with something like that.
That's a great point, Marsha.
Okay, Carrie, have we had enough people respond that we can see what we're doing here?
Yes. So 65% said Linda Blue and only 4% said Matt Blue.
Okay. What we find then is those people that said Linda have it right. Now, there's going to be some family dissension here, I think, because you know what we've got is Matt receiving 0. Matt is saying to Linda, now wait a minute, Dad wrote a will that was later. Don't you think I should receive this property? And Linda says, well, you know, blah, blah, it was the contract. But we've got Matt singing the blues. And I don't think Matt's going to be participating in Thanksgiving or December activities amongst the family. So we got to keep track of what we've done. Now, it could have been that Gary would have decided he wanted to leave his property to the Montana 4-H Foundation, of course. And then we've got Matt and Linda both singing the blues because they didn't receive the property. So title companies, you know, this is still an issue. And so I just wanted to remind you of that we can run into some problems with that for certain situations. So keep in mind that you cannot undo a transfer on death deed or any of you with the old beneficiary deeds. You cannot undo it with a will. And really, it doesn't make any difference if the will was written back when, or if the will was written after the TOD was done. No, you have to go by the contract, which in this case is a transfer on death deed. So Mandie, I've heard, I think I read it in the paper somewhere, that the legislature last time passed some sort of law about vessels and vehicles. Is that true?
That is true, Marsha. And we are going to use our fringed grass of Parnassus?
Parnassus, yeah.
Parnassus,
Isn't that
yes,
a
thank you.
weird name?
To remember that. And so there is a new Montana law, beneficiary designation for vehicles or vessels title, and the form is the form MV13, and this law was effective October 1st of 2021. So we're going to talk about 4 things today that we can do with that. But first, let's talk about a vehicle. You might not be thinking of all of the ways you could use this. So we're talking about automobiles, vans, trucks, sport utility vehicles, motorcycles, recreational vehicles, RVs, trailers, and snowmobiles. So those are examples of vehicles, and vessels like sailboats that are 12 feet or longer, motorized boats, or personal watercraft. So those are some examples of things that you might want to use. So what is not included would be an airplane, a manufactured home, or a mobile home.
At least at this point in time.
All right, so the ways that we might use this form is we can use it to designate a beneficiary on the form when we're applying for the title. So at the time of purchase, you can use this to designate a beneficiary right then. We can use it to add a new beneficiary to the current beneficiary on record. So we could have up to 2 beneficiaries on file. We can also use it to change our current beneficiary on record. So this would be a good thing if you've changed your mind. And so you would change that using this form. And then the 4th way that we might use this form would be to revoke the current beneficiary. So you would leave the beneficiary section blank on the form. So take advantage of the new law, and you can use the MV13 for a vessel or vehicle to name a beneficiary. And I saw that Carrie put in the chat the link to where the resources are on our webpage. So if you're curious about that, go ahead and you can seek those out right there using that. So our observation from the Lady Slipper is that time has slipped away and it is time to wrap things up. So we hope that we have steered you to an awareness of how you could avoid probate, the cost of probate using PODs on your financial accounts at your banks and credit unions. We hope that we have steered you to an awareness of how a transfer on death registration on your stocks, bonds, and mutual funds can also help you avoid the cost of probate. We're hoping that we've steered you to an awareness of how transfer on death deeds on your real property could help you avoid the cost of probate, and to consider if that's an appropriate choice for you. And we hope that we have steered you to an awareness of how a beneficiary designation on your vehicle or vessel title can help you avoid the cost of probate. So if you don't have a memory like this elephant's head, I want to one more time remind you that we have over 50 Mont guides available on financial planning topics, and that they are all available on the website montana.edu/estate planning. So you can access all of those there, as well as the recordings and the other resources. So don't forget, you can also drop into your MSU Extension office. So you can go to your local county office and ask them, and they can help you get those as well. And one more reminder where our recordings are. So they're available at that website as well. So it's www.montana.edu/estate planning/fabulous Fridays. And you can use the QR code if you would like to find those. I'd like to remind you to join Marsha next week on Fabulous Fridays, and she's going to be talking about revocable and testamentary trusts, which is better and when to use those.
And I might say the reason that Mandie won't be able to join us is that she had a presentation accepted at a national conference, and we're just very excited for her. It's called JSEP, and they have a chance. Is it DC, Mandie, that you're going to?
We're going to Kansas City.
Kansas City. Oh,
Yep.
close to my home state of Kansas. Well, anyway, we'll miss her, but she'll be back for the next session.
Thank you, Marsha. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Jane Wolery, the Executive Director of the Montana 4-H Foundation, and Sarah Hamlen, our Montana 4-H alumni and special guest today.
Okay, well, if everybody will wait just a second, I'll stop sharing, and then we can have a bigger picture of people. Do I save the poll questions? Yes. Okay. Uh-oh. I shouldn't have checked that. Sorry. Hold on a second. Okay.
Okay, great. We are now able to unmute ourselves. You know, for many, many years, there have been people who have wanted to be able to just mute me and have me only talk when they allow me to. So, Sarah, I hope that you also are unmuted now. I just am so excited for all of us that we're going to get a chance to visit with Sarah Hamlen today, because every time that I visit with Sarah, it's fun and I learn something, and she just keeps me on my toes with her quick thinking. So to get started and introduce Sarah a little bit, I would like to share some interesting ties that Sarah and I have. When I first met Sarah, I was working as an MSU Extension agent in Teton County, and she had come into Extension as an agent in Marr County. And so when she reached out to me the first time, she said, I feel like I know your family a little bit because I have some of the Wolery cookbooks. And now my mom had produced these Wolery cookbooks, and they sometimes the recipes had little stories in them about the item, what was made. Many of them had 4-H demonstration recipes in them. And we just recently learned that it was my husband's Aunt Joan who gave those cookbooks to Sarah and her family. So I just feel really connected to Sarah, and I think that's one of life's great rewards, is to feel connected to others and in community with others. And I think 4-H does that for us. Sarah and I have reconnected again a little bit through her daughters and 4-H. So Sarah, I'd invite you to tell us what your daughters have been up to with their 4-H projects and things this year.
Oh, yes, Jane, it's been wonderful to reconnect. And as many of you who have children in 4-H know, that once they start engaging in multi-county, state and national programs, we start to run into those Montana families that have been part of 4-H for years. So it's been fun for me to see my kids be able to engage at a different level, but it's also been a lot of fun for me to reconnect with people that I actually went through 4-H with, and now are in, of course, in my peer group as parents within that program. So we're very active in horse and woodworking, and now we're also getting more involved with the leadership elements of 4-H, which is, of course, a wonderful place for our kids to just excel and find new ways to express themselves.
For many years, I helped run the demonstration contest, and shout out to Cheryl Knowles, who was doing that ahead of me. And so she trained me up, and I took over running the Congress contest for demonstrations. And this year, I wasn't running it, but I was so glad that I was in the top final runoff to watch Sarah's daughter Sheila gave one of the best presentations that I've seen in 4-H. So she won first in demos and was able to travel on to National 4-H Congress with that. And she was also a speaker for a Montanans for 4-H event. Can you tell us a little bit about when she came home from National Congress, the what you learned about her experience with that? I think it was just probably pretty exciting as a parent to get to visit with her.
It was wonderful, Jane, and thank you very much for your kind comments. It was especially fun for us to hear from Sheila because she was also able to serve on the leadership team for National Congress, which was one of 12 youth that were able to help provide the emceeing and coordination of events during Congress. So we now have a resource that we're very happy to share with others and with teens who maybe qualify for National Congress and maybe want to know more about the leadership team. But she was super enthused, and as we know, when we get kids out and engaged, it's hard to quell that enthusiasm, which is a benefit for our county and for other kids in the state as well.
It is. And I was thinking of Mary Jane today. Actually, I had a little photo that I think I'll just try to show because I loved it. She has on her jacket an outstanding record book award. This sweatshirt must have been given with someone who donated money to the local program for her to be awarded with that. So she's in the horse and woodworking and some things like that and venturing out into some statewide events too, isn't she?
She is. And we were just able to attend State Citizenship Seminar, which of course is supported by the Montana 4-H Foundation, and was an incredible event. It was very well run and wonderful ways to teach our kids about engaging with their local government and participating when they turn 18 and are able to actually vote. But obviously understanding the process was super important for them too.
Well, and I know citizenship has such broad connotations, I think, and part of what I always think in terms of citizenship is being a good, productive citizen in your community and in your profession. And so with that, Sarah, if you would tell us just a little bit about your professional background and some of the positions you've held over time.
Certainly. So yes, I attribute my desire to go out of state for college to the 4-H program, which I got to travel quite a bit as a 4-Her, and just decided I would go out and see what was out in the world. And then my initial career was in commodity trading, which was a wonderfully challenging position, but I found that I really wanted to come back to Montana. And as you mentioned, Jane, I did work with Extension when my children were young, both at the county level and then also at the state level. But then found my calling as a financial advisor and was able to come to White Sulphur Springs and establish a practice here. And it's been a wonderful combination of many different types of experiences, but this is where I'm very content to be.
Well, and I know as a financial advisor, some of what you do is help people figure out how to build wealth. And today's topic was how to direct your assets. And most of our topics are how to direct money and things like that. I know as you help people build wealth, part of the reason you do that and part of the reason that all of us try to build wealth is to be generous to others. And so if you could speak a little bit to how generosity has factored into your work and practice.
Absolutely. There was a great study that was done a number of years ago, and it looked at how do people feel about money? What are the words that they use when they describe their relationship with finance? And what we found was that those words were really negative. Most people use words like fear, scarcity, lack, vulnerability, words that we would hope that we're not spending a lot of time in our lives with. And so this group of researchers then said, well, maybe that's only true of people who have a certain income. So let's go out and talk to people who have a higher net worth, or maybe people who have just experienced a change in income. Maybe they got a promotion or they inherited some wealth. Maybe their words are different. And so they went out and looked at different subsets of our society. And what they found was as net worth increased, we would expect those words, or the hypothesis was that those words would get more positive. What they found was that they got more extreme and they got more extremely negative. And the finding ultimately was that our society places a huge amount of pressure on us that as we increase our wealth, we also need to increase our spending. So I got a new job, therefore I need to get a new car, and maybe I need to upgrade my house, and maybe my kids need to go to a different school. And so instead of changing our relationship with money, we just exacerbate the issue and make things bigger. The one thing that they found across all income brackets and across all net worths that flipped people from feeling like they were in a position of scarcity and lack to feeling like they lived in abundance was generosity. And it makes sense to those of us who grew up in 4-H. We know that when we give of ourselves, when we serve our communities, we feel better. But we also understand that we have something that we can contribute outside of our own needs. And so when we see people start to act generously with their finances, what we see is that they actually become more content and are able to see themselves as part of a bigger whole. So I find it ironic that the same tenets that we teach kids in 4-H, give of your head, heart, hands, and health, are the same things that we as adults should be reminded of on a regular basis. So sorry to go on so long, Jane, but generosity is absolutely a critical part of our relationship with money.
It really is. And I have really been leaning into more of an abundance mindset just personally and trying to get out of that scarcity mindset. So much so that I started keeping track 2 months ago, just in my notes folder in my phone. I call it the Great Give. And every day I try to make sure I am giving something, whether that's homemade treats. I've given a few classes, did a 4-H project meeting, just ideas and advice. I hosted a couple of generosity parties at my house, so invitations, connections, and I just find that we benefit as much from being generous as receiving generosity from others. And so I just think it's a great thing for people to keep in mind as they're looking at how they're transferring assets and things like that. Now, speaking of generosity, we talked a little bit about some of the generosity that your family has experienced through the donors to the 4-H Foundation. Can you tell us some of the ways that you benefited growing up?
Oh, certainly. And don't let me forget, I do want to mention a couple of ways that we can use today's topic about avoiding probate and beneficiary designations to benefit charities as well. But I personally have received untold benefits from the 4-H Foundation. I was a state 4-H ambassador officer, ironically assigned to work with the 4-H Foundation, but also had many of the programs that we sponsored as ambassadors supported by the foundation. Of course, traveled to National Congress and Conference, and the foundation heavily subsidizes all of those programs. My children, of course, just attended Citizenship Seminar. Sheila went to National Congress. We know that a lot of the support for Extension and for the 4-H Center comes from the 4-H Foundation. And so if we're connected to 4-H, we're connected to the foundation. And it's an important thing for us to remember as we're working with youth in that great development program.
Yeah. And circling back to remind you, go ahead and tell us as far as using the TODs and PODs and so on.
Well, obviously, we always want to make sure that beneficiary or TOD and POD designations are correct when we're looking at financial accounts. And thank you so much, Marsha, for the great information on the topic. Mandie too. But I do want to remind people too that tax efficiency may be something that you want to look at, and a great benefit to leave or a great asset to leave to charity can be IRA or old 401k assets, because they can transfer tax-free to a charity, whereas if you leave them to your children, they're taxable. So not to get into the weeds too much, but just as you're being thoughtful or working with your advisors about how to leave which assets, tax efficiency should be part of that conversation.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think generosity does come in many forms. It comes in thoughtful planning. It can be in protecting land and resources, sharing time and talent. And I find that a close companion to generosity is gratitude. And so, Sarah, we are so grateful for your time sharing with us today. We hope you'll stay on in case there are some questions that you might be able to answer from your financial advisor side of things. And thank you to those who have contributed to Montana youth and communities through 4-H, because whether it's $4 or $4 million, it all makes a difference. If you or someone you know is interested in learning more about how to live and give generously, contact me by going to the Montana 4-H Foundation website. And if you have a heart to contribute to other organizations in your planning, I encourage you to reach out to them. So just try to live your day in abundance and generosity today and gratitude. And back to you, Marsha and Mandie. We are so grateful for the opportunity to learn with you today.
Well, thank you, Jane and Sarah. And, there's going to be a lot of people withdrawing from their traditional individual retirement account. So I'm not talking about the Roth. And there were some new rules that were passed in, like the end of December, I guess, kind of snuck through Congress. But I've been aware of being able to use a required minimum distribution. They call those RMDs. So how could that be used to benefit the 4-H Foundation? Something like that.
Oh, that's a great question, Marsha. There are a couple of different ways that you can look at using your RMDs to benefit both your family and or charity. And one of those would be to use what's called a qualified charitable designation or a qualified charitable distribution, which means that you just send your funds from your IRA, and you can actually do that at age 70 and a half, even though they just moved with that legislation that you referenced, Marsha, the RMD age up to age 73. You can send those dollars directly out of your IRA to a charity, and they basically are like Monopoly. They don't pass go, they don't collect $200. It's a non-taxable event. And it can be a very efficient way to support charities with the amounts that you have to take out anyway if you don't need them for income. Another strategy can be, though, too, using those required distributions to fund a life insurance contract that can go to your children tax-free, but then you can leave a portion of your IRA dollars to those charities as a legacy gift without a tax consequence. So again, not a recommendation by any stretch, but just know that as you're approaching age 70 and a half, you have options that you don't have prior to that age in terms of some tax efficiency work.
Okay, and that, I guess, is the advantage of people that have saved for a long, long time. That, I think some of us were influenced by our parents and grandparents that grew up in the Depression. And so you save, but maybe then you are fortunate enough that by the time you retire, you can say, oh, gee, I don't need that after all. And what other good could I do with something like that? So, well, okay, Carrie, let's get to you. Are there some questions that we have in the chat? I know I saw one flash on the screen real quick about PODs and TODs to minors. And yes, you can go ahead and say, if something happens to me, I want it to go to my child. And the child is under age 18. Now, the catch to that is that, yes, the kids inherit it, but what we want to take a look at then is a conservator is going to be needed to be appointed if that child is under age 18. So there may be some other kinds of opportunities, like if you had a trust, you could POD it to the trust, and the trust is going to be used for the benefit of the minor. So this would be a chance for you to talk with your attorney to see if that is something that you really want to do with a POD. Okay, I saw another one that talked about the percentage cost of probate. And let me emphasize, it is no longer a percentage of the estate. It used to be 3% of the first 40,000 and 2% in excess of that. And it didn't matter how much work the attorney did. It didn't matter how organized you were. Well, now the fee is supposed to be reasonable. I know. I've been hit at meetings about that. Now, Marsha, come on. What's reasonable? Well, what you need to take a look at is everybody that does their estate planning, to me, they're organized. Things are going to be able to be handled very quickly. And therefore, it shouldn't take an attorney a year to settle your estate. And so we can't really judge by percentages anymore. But the attorneys that you would be dealing with probably have enough experience with some probates. And if you've got some things that need to be taken care of, they can at least give you an estimate of what that cost might be. And it's going to be probably hourly fee. So the more you do yourself as far as organizing ahead of time, the more money you're going to save to be able to leave to your heirs. So think about that.
Marsha, we have a question from someone who called in. So if a title company won't issue a new property title for a year, does that leave a beneficiary open to debt claims? And what impact will that have for the beneficiary with no title for 1 year?
Yeah, see, that is the challenge. I saw a comment too that attorneys have told me that they're running into is that so many people are doing the PODs, the TODs, and all those things that there's not necessarily enough money to pay the creditors that need to be paid. Now, there is a process for going back and saying, hey, and yes, during that year's time, if there are debts that person owes, then, hey, somebody's going to be checking into that, and the attorneys are going to be getting together to say, this person has a contractual responsibility to pay these bills. So how can we still get those paid? So I wouldn't want people to be thinking of PODs and TODs and these things as a way to avoid creditors. That's why we have the probate originally, is to make sure the property gets to the right individuals. But at the same time, if there are debts that need to be paid, we have a moral responsibility to make sure they do get paid. So I want to make sure, for example, for me, I want to be cremated, and I better leave enough money out there so that that bill could be paid and not have so much that somebody has to go to court and get in a fit about something like that. What other questions do we have?
So if a beneficiary is named for the real estate property in the will, then does it go to probate?
Yes. What a lot of people don't know is that a will has to go to the district court to be declared valid. A will has no effect whatsoever until it's there. The district judge puts the stamp of approval on it, and the probate process is to say, okay, is this really this person's will? How do we know it's not fake, and some of those kinds of things? And so, yeah, we want to have the will validated with the district court. Okay.
Next question, would probate be quicker than a transfer on death?
My sense of that would be no. But, well, I'll take that back. Probate, because of the title company issue, could be faster because you can get a probate done in a reasonable amount of time. It doesn't have to take up to 2 years. You see, state law will allow you 2 years as the personal representative and the attorney to get the estate settled. And if the estate isn't settled, what we've got is the Supreme Court administrator notifying the district judge. The district judge calls in the attorney and the personal representative and says, hey, what's going on here? This probate has been out there for 2 years. You haven't settled anything. Well, maybe what the attorney will say is, look, Your Honor, what we're trying to do is sell the property. And land prices being what they are right now, the heirs have given permission to, let's just wait a while. So there could be legitimate reasons for that probate not being closed. But since we have this year with the title companies, I dare say a will could be, as long as there's not any other problems, because you have 90 days to have the creditors send in their bills, and depends on how complicated the estate is as well. If you've got PODs on almost everything, and you've got a little bit left here, there's not that much for the will to control. So therefore, it doesn't take as long. So it depends on the estate.
Do you want to
Okay.
answer more questions or
Yeah,
answer?
yes, please. And if there's any for Mandie or Sarah or Jane, that would be great as well.
Okay, next question. What is the percentage cost for probate?
We don't have them anymore. We used to, that was at 3% of the first 40 and 2% in excess of. So that law was eliminated. So the fee is reasonable. So I guess you could say the percentage is reasonable.
I think this is the last question, Marsha.
Okay.
If one of my children through their agreement is going to be the executor because the other lives out of state, should they both or just one be listed on a POD or TOD?
Okay, let's think about the executor is an old term that we use. Now it's personal representative. So the personal representative is the one that you nominate in your will, or if you don't nominate one, there will be one chosen, and it will probably be one of your children. So the idea, see, is if you do a POD, you've already named the beneficiary. So we don't need a personal representative to take care of that. The beneficiary would need to be notified, I guess, if you haven't already told that individual. So technically, there's not a personal representative if you've got everything passing by contract.
Marsha, can I offer something there?
Yeah, jump in, Sarah.
So I hear this question a lot from people, and what they're trying to facilitate is I want to make sure that the person that's in charge of settling on my affairs has the liquidity that they need to settle everything. And a lot of times that what they assume is, well, I'll just leave all the assets to child one, and then they'll split out whatever is left over to their siblings. I'll tell you that that gets really, really complicated for the child that's left all of the assets, particularly if those assets are taxable, because they're liable for the taxes, but their siblings are not. The other thing to consider is that there's gift tax limits. And so if we're leaving especially a sizable estate to one child with the expectation that they're then going to just give out whatever is due to the others at the end of the day, they may not be able to do that efficiently within the gift tax parameters. And they're not obligated to give anything away that's been transferred to them by a POD or a TOD. So if they suddenly inherit $1 million with the understanding that they're supposed to give thirds out to their brothers and sisters later, they may decide not to do that. And really there's very little legal recourse without a major court battle to settle those issues. So I apologize, Marsha, if I've chimed in and run over.
No, that's good, because I was hoping that, and you did at the last, the bad part about families. I mean, don't put your child in a situation where they have got, because the others won't trust them. I find that once mom and dad are gone, that's the glue that holds the family together. And then you've got this one child, and this is the child that maybe took care of mom, took care of dad, and in their brain, they're saying, I deserve more. So no, I'm not going to share it with those other two people. And see, your estate planning goal was not taken care of. So don't put that child in the situation where they have to divvy out because the others won't trust them. I hate to say that, but I've heard more bad stories about that than I care to admit. Okay.
Can I throw an idea?
Yeah.
Past?
Yeah. Jump in.
I just wonder if it might, for some people who are wanting to make sure there's enough money for final expenses and things like that, and they want to leave that to the person they've designated, if they do need to have a personal representative because some things are going to go through probate because of their will and so on, would it be possible to just have like a extra checking account that had a certain dollar amount for final expenses that you just kind of kept there and had the POD so that, or had that available for the, POD, I think is what I was thinking on that, so that you're not giving everything in your checking account. You have segmented what you think would be needed to pay final expenses. I'm not quite sure that I'm coming across correctly, but.
Well, that's okay. But another idea would also be, let's visit with the mortuary or the guy mortician. And Montana does allow for burial trusts. And so I've met several people that what they've done is paid for their death, whatever, expenses, a funeral if they want one, cremation if they don't, etc. And that's all handled. And this week I've been just talking with a single individual who does not have any relatives, who has friends that are all about her age. And she's saying, I've got to get my act together here because I don't want to be a burden to other people. And so that's one of the things that she'll be looking at is, does she want to do one of those life insurance or life, pick up my words there, my brain's not working. Yeah. So that's another alternative. Okay, Carrie, are there any other questions?
There's one more. So beneficiaries on counts, do they serve as TOD or POD?
Say that again.
So beneficiaries on accounts, do they serve as a TOD or a POD?
Okay, we got to know what kind of accounts you're talking about. If you're saying savings, checking, etc., those are PODs. If you're talking accounts that are stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, that would be a TOD. So if I haven't answered any of your questions to your to your satisfaction, or you thought of another one, please do.
Investments, Marsha. So what would
Okay.
that be?
And that would be the TOD, transfer on death registration. Okay. And we have that information that's in our non-probate mock guide. So take a look at that and just kind of review the information that's there. That's why we have the resource page available to you. And again, additional questions that come up, what Carrie does is she goes through those, she highlights them for me, so I see them very quickly. And I know I only got to one, I think I got to all 5 that had questions last time and was able to get that done by last night because I wanted to make sure it was before our sets today. So I think what we'll do now is close. And again, we want to thank our guests, Jane Wolery and Sarah Hamlen. Great job, Mandie. I'm on a mission next week, but we'll get together again the 17th. So
Marsha?
everybody, yes.
We also have a winner for the travel mug.
Right. That's good to know. Can we hear a first name?
Kenneth.
Hannah?
No, Kenneth.
Kenneth. Okay. So we'll be sending that out to you then. And again, thanks for your presentation or being here today, and be safe and keep healthy. Bye.
And you're all winners. We're here for this.
Thanks, Jane.
See you.